Welcome to Season 2, Episode 2 of the Selective Mutism Help Home Educational Learning Program podcast. My name is Kelly, and I'm a parent of a child who has overcome selective mutism, and I'm also a BCBA specializing in supporting kids and teens with SM. This podcast is meant to provide general information about SM, and it's not to diagnose, treat, or be used in lieu of help from an SM specialist. This is part 2 of the 3-part fading in conversation. Part 1 was a discussion of how I did a fade in with a new client in their home to establish verbal communication. Part 2 will be transferring speech from myself to a same-aged peer that my client did not know. So prior to introducing a new person, I wanted to make sure that I still had speech established, as I was only working with this client once a week. And so before I introduced a new talking partner, I wanted to have another session where it was just my client, his mom, his sister, and myself in their home to make sure that he was still able to communicate verbally with me. And I also wanted to take that time to educate him about selective mutism. And this can be kind of challenging, especially for a kiddo who is on the younger side. So this kiddo is 6. And so trying to help them understand what SM can be challenging. So when I got to their home for the second visit, again, I didn't put any pressure for him to speak or to answer questions, used I wonder statements, and just kind of followed his lead. And I saw that he was able to continue communicating with me verbally, which was fantastic that it continued even a week later after I saw him for the first time. Now, the strategy I had this time around for helping him understand selective mutism was to use the very first book that I ever read to my own child about selective mutism, which is My Name is Eliza and I Don't Talk at School, which is written by Lucy Nathanson. Now, I knew that my client had this same book as I had been working with his mom prior to him and I meeting, and this was something that she had read to him. So what I did is I brought over, using air quotes here, my son's favorite books. And I showed him different books. So there's like a Paw Patrol book, probably like another car book, and then I had this Eliza book. And when I showed him the Eliza book, his eyes got really bright and big, and he ran off to his room and he grabbed the same book. And I'm like, oh my goodness, we have the same book. That's really amazing. Like, what are the odds? And then I started telling him about why I had that book. And I started explaining to him that my daughter had this thing called selective mutism where she couldn't talk at school. She could talk fine at home. She was silly and crazy and super smart. But when she got to school, she wasn't able to use her voice. And I kind of asked, does that ever happen to you? And he nodded his head yes, and you could just tell he was very interested in knowing that somebody else was out there like him. And so I told him, I use these small steps to help her. And I was hoping maybe I could share those things I did with my daughter with you. And again, he's nodding his head. So that was kind of the first step into letting him know what was going on in a way that wasn't really scary or intimidating or confusing. It was just a little step into him knowing what was happening and how I was going to support him and continue working with him in, again, a way that was more natural. So after I made sure that he was verbal with me in his home, which he was, and again started kind of planting these seeds about what selective mutism is and the struggles that come with that. I then wanted to bring in a new peer to his home to see if I could transfer speech from myself to him. So luckily, I have a son who is the same age as my client. They go to the same school. They're not in the same class, however, but they've seen each other in passing, not knowing who each other was. So I brought my son to our next session. And again, if you remember back to last episode, I the initial meeting and session we had, I had presented it as I need help picking out games for my son for a fun game night. And so my client helped pick out the games that he liked from his own home and then from the bag of games that I brought. And so this session, when I was bringing my son, was set up as, can you show him the games that you like and see if he likes those same games? So my son came. Again, we didn't put any pressure on my client to speak. We just introduced the boys together. His sister was there during the session as well. And we started playing the fishing game, the same game that we played during the very first session. Again, no expectation for him to speak. I wasn't asking any questions. I was observing. I was kind of saying, what I was seeing, like, oh, you almost got one, or you did it. If he would make a sound, I would echo that. So if it was a sound of frustration, like, oh, I would echo that. Like, oh, yeah, you almost had that. Just to get him more comfortable being around a new person. And I'm very lucky too in the fact that my son does understand the disorder and he knows kind of what to do. And so he was a great little coworker I had that day. And again, using a lot of I wonder statements. Now, I wonder if there's any other game you have that my son might like. And so he could go and get that. So the next game we played was, and I should mention too, during the fishing game, when it was done, all three kids, so it was my son, my client's sister, all three kiddos counted the fish out loud that they caught and then said the total number. So my client was able to do that. He was able to count all of his fish out loud and then let us know how many he caught, which again is that ability to get his voice out and not really demand opportunity. It was what the whole group was doing and he was comfortable doing that. So that was exciting. So then we moved on to playing Pop-Up Paw Patrol, which is like Trouble, but it's Paw Patrol themed. And the rule, again using air quotes, rule that we had was that when you popped your number, whatever number came up on the die, you would say out loud. So that was another way that we could incorporate speaking into this game to keep his voice working in front of a new peer. That wasn't anything that was open-ended. It was very closed-ended. It was, he could look at the dice and count out the dots on it and then tell us what the number was. So that was another really effective way to start working up that communication ladder to get him comfortable using his voice in front of a new peer. So then after that game, we were struggling a bit, popping sixes to get us out of home. So we ended up putting that game away and playing another game. And this was the game that we had the most success with during our first session, which was The Floor is Lava. So again, this is a game where there's different colored tiles, relatively large tiles that you put on the floor, that you spin a big spinner, it'll land on yellow, and you have to get to the yellow tile without touching the ground. So the floor is lava. So we did this with my son and with his sister and my client and did the same thing. So when you would spin the spinner, you would announce to the other players what color, and they would move to their color, and then we would take turns spinning. And again, this was another really good, effective way. Number one, it got our bodies moving, which is always a good thing. It's unpredictable, too. You don't know what color's going to come up. And it's a lot of motor planning. You have to figure out the pathway. So there's a lot going on in this game. And then to top that off, you have to be loud enough for everybody to hear the color so they know what space to go to. And this, again, worked really, really well. The kids had a ton of fun. Everybody was using their voice, they're laughing, they're being silly, and it was another great success using this game. Then what was interesting, again, I always kind of like to let things happen naturally as well. And so my son saw a toy on the other side of the room. I think it was like a Spider-Man car track or something like that. And so he saw that, and the boys went over to it together. Nobody prompted them to do so. The mom and I kind of stood back in the kitchen area while the boys were in the living room area. And as we were observing them, we saw them starting to have back and forth conversation. So my client was able to tell my son about this game and show him how it worked. And my son could respond to it. And it was just a natural 2 kindergartners or 6-year-old boys playing. And it just melted my heart and the mom's heart. And even thinking about it now, I get a little teary-eyed because it is such a pivotal moment for these kids to start using their voice with somebody new. So great third session with my client. Great results of transferring speech to a new peer. And now the goal was to start generalizing verbal communication. So fantastic that my client was able to talk with me, with my son in his home where he's the most comfortable. Wonderful. But obviously, not everybody's going to be in his home that he needs to communicate verbally with. So we want to start generalizing that to other environments. And again, as a behavior analyst, that's very important in what we do. So the next session, our 4th session, I had his mom bring him to my home office. So I wanted to start, number 1, keeping mom there as that support person, the person that makes his anxiety low. And then starting him to have communications with me. So he came in, I tried to start with more nonverbal ways for him to communicate if he'd like. Asking yes/no questions and seeing where he's at. Because obviously the more anxious he is, the less likely he's going to be able to use his voice. But I was pleasantly surprised to see that he was able to answer verbally with a yes/no when I asked him a yes/no question. And so then I offered him choices. I'm like, okay, you get to choose what you want to do with our session today. So I showed him a board game. I showed him a card game. And I said, or we can go on a little scavenger hunt and find all the pets we have, because we have a lot. And luckily, he chose to find all of our pets, which I was secretly hoping he would pick. So that's what we started with. So we started in my office. Again, it's just him, his mom, and myself. And I used to have a fish on top of my bookshelf. And so I said, there's a pet in this room. And so what I was working on was giving him an opportunity to scan the room with his eyes. So you may have seen in your own child or a client or a student with SM that when they're in a state of anxiety, their eyes are usually down towards the floor and looking away. They're not scanning. And this is what happens when they get into that freeze state. But by allowing them an opportunity to pick their head up and start scanning a room, it's naturally bringing them back into a state of connection and lowering that anxiety because they're able to take more in. So even though he wasn't at a state of extreme anxiety, he wasn't frozen in that moment, I still wanted to give him that opportunity to scan the room. So after scanning for a little bit, he saw the fish and he pointed and he said, there's a fish. So I'm like, yep, that's Sammy. And I told him about the fish. And then I said, okay, I think I had a couple cats outside in our lanai. So we went out there, we saw the cats, and I said, I have some other pets upstairs. So we walked upstairs, and in the first room was my son, the youngest one, who he had met the previous week. So now that I knew I had speech established with me, this was an opportunity now to transfer speech to a peer he knew, but in a new environment, and to see if he could still use his voice with that child. And he was able to. So they were able to have a conversation about my son's fish. So he had a fish in his room and talk with him about that, look at some things in their room. And it was just, quote unquote, a normal opportunity, communication between the two of them, which again was really great to see that it was generalizing in a different environment. Then after that, we went down the hall and we went into my daughter's room. He had never met my daughter before. He probably saw her at school, but had never formally been introduced to her. And she has some hamsters in her room. So what was interesting kind of watching him was when right before we would go into a new room, he would slow down and wait for mom to go in first. And this is something that's very common with our kiddos with anxiety, is they want to follow somebody else in so that if something, again, I'm using a lot of air quotes today, bad is going to happen, the person in front of them can deal with it and they don't have to. But what we want to try to do is flipping that, is allowing them an opportunity to be the first one in a new environment to show that they can take on whatever's going to be in that room. So again, I always like kind of observing how my client is moving around and entering new spaces. So we entered into my daughter's room. She showed him her hamsters. I think at the time she had 2 or 3. I can't remember. So she took them out and showed them to him and told her her hamsters' names. And again, this is my child who had selective mutism. So the fact that she was able to do this little presentation, if you will, in front of a child she didn't know and a mom she didn't know was, again, like, I start tearing up thinking about it because of how far she has come, and it was no big deal to her. She could just do it, and it was a normal thing, which again is so amazing to reflect back on. But what we noticed in that situation is that although my client wasn't able to talk directly to my daughter at that point, he was talking to me and to his mom in front of her at an audible volume. So great. That was a fantastic win in my book. So then after that, again, we have a lot of pets. We walked across the hall to my middle son's room. So my daughter is in 5th grade. My middle son is in 4th grade. So they're a little older than my client. We walked into my son's room. Again, there was some apprehension with going into that room because it's a new space, a new person, a new animal. We didn't know what was going to be in there. And my kids, I should also mention, they have aerial silks. So they need a lot of swinging motions to help regulate. It's good to work on their core muscles and all that. So each of my kiddos was sitting in an aerial swing as my client walked in. So he was probably like, this is weird. What kind of house is this? But just throwing that out there as a little extra visualization for you guys. So my son is in his aerial silk and he has a bearded dragon. So this is obviously not as cute and fluffy as the cats and the hamsters and our dogs. So there was a lot more, again, apprehension with going up to the cage. But again, my son, he did a great job, giving him some facts about the bearded dragon. And then I kind of was just wanting to see how he would react when put in a situation that might be a little bit scary, because this dragon, he's the sweetest thing. I love him. But he looks intimidating because he looks like he has spikes all over his body. And I should mention too, my son, or my client, was able to talk in front of my son while we were in his room. So again, new person he's never officially met. He was able to communicate to myself and to his mom in front of my son. He's communicating verbally and audibly. So again, fantastic to see. But what's interesting was when I brought the bearded dragon out, my client immediately went behind mom. He did not want anything to do with that dragon. You could see a shift in his body language, and you could just tell that the fear alarm was blaring, and he wanted to go nowhere near that thing when he was out. So again, that helped me kind of understand a potential opportunity to work through those fear responses, and help use a systematic desensitization approach to working through a fearful state through exposure therapy and things like that. So I kind of tucked that little observation in the back of my head. But once I put the bearded dragon back in his little tank, my client came right over, was right up to the glass, and was like tapping where the bugs were, and was very interested in this dragon. So all in all, this session of generalizing speech to a new environment to people he already could communicate with went fantastic. Again, he was able to communicate verbally in front of peers he didn't know. And another thing that I like to do when I'm observing my clients is just see how their body is moving. So again, this can give me additional insight as to how the body's reacting when anxious, as well as maybe any deficits in this brain-body connection. And what I noticed with this kiddo in particular is the way he moved up and down our stairs. So usually when we walk up the stairs, we put one foot on one step, and then we alternate and put the next foot on the next step up, and so on. So we're alternating feet as we're going up or down the stairs. What I noticed with my client is that he was doing 2 steps on each stair. So it'd be like step, step, and then go up, step, step, and then go up, so it wasn't this fluid alternating motion. So again, things that I just kind of keep an eye on and start noticing. And it's so interesting to learn more about this. And I hope you guys have heard about the conference I have coming up. And this is actually something that we're going to be discussing during day 1, which is our virtual day. So we'll be having Charlotte Davies doing an interview with Joanna Turner, and they're talking all about how the body's alignment, the ability to cross midline, and the integration of primitive reflexes can contribute to anxiety our kids may be experiencing. So understanding this additional layer of what may be going on from the inside and something we can work on it could be one of those missing pieces for our clients or our kids or our students. So if you're interested in learning more about the body's response to anxiety or the physiological changes that go on, and then learn how to support those changes, this conference will be really great for you. Or if you just want to nerd out on the neuroscience behind SM and about music therapy and learn about acupuncture and primitive reflexes and the nervous system, all of that is going to be part of this conference. The conference is going to be April 4th through April 6th. There's a virtual option, so anybody anywhere in the world can join. But if you want to come in person and be with people, I know sometimes we are on an island by ourselves. Sometimes it's nice to connect with people in person. We're going to be in person in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. Again, it's April 4th through 6th. This is a beautiful time of year in Florida. So if you're looking to get out to some sunshine, this would be a great opportunity for you to come on down. But I will leave a link in the episode notes that you can access more information about this conference. Or you can always go to my website, which is www.smhelp.org. So please check it out. See if there's some topics of conversation that might interest you. A big theme in day 1 also is this curiosity. Can we be curious about what our kids are experiencing? And again, I try to do that in my sessions with my clients and observing how they're moving and any changes in their body language. And then also I should mention too, if you use the code SMIC 2025, you'll save 10% on the registration too. So I hope you check it out. I hope you can join us in person. If not, virtual is a great option as well. Next episode of the podcast will be on transferring speech from a known peer to a classroom peer. So look for that next month. I don't know the exact date on when that will be released, but I'll try to get a video or a podcast out once a month. So if you have any questions, you want to connect with me, please don't hesitate to reach out. My email is smhelp2020@gmail.com. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.